The Kthari hegemony did not make first contact with humanity out of curiosity. They did so out of a desperate, silent calculus. Their scouts had observed Terran vessels from a distance for decades, noting their robust construction, their disciplined, if seemingly slow, strategic formations, and their peculiar, planet-bound social structures that nevertheless projected power into the void. To the Kthari, these were all positive, legible signs. Kthari philosophy, the bedrock of their civilization for 15,000 years, was one of visible strength. It was not mere militarism, it was a holistic, all-encompassing cultural operating system. A being's worth was determined by the strength it projected into the universe at any given moment. Strength was not a potential, not a future possibility, but a current, demonstrable output. Their language had 17 distinct tenses for expressing actions and capabilities in the present and immediate future observable window. It had only one for the past, used primarily for technical record-keeping, and none for the speculative future. To plan for a future strength was to admit present weakness. To hide a capability was to not possess it. This manifested in every interaction. A Kthari merchant would open negotiations by displaying its entire inventory of valuable goods, risking predation, to prove its commercial strength. A Kthari scientist would publish raw, unverified data streams in real time to prove the fertility of its intellect. In conflict, which was frequent and ritualized, all forces were committed immediately. The opening move of any war was the total, blinding deployment of their ultimate weaponry. To hold a reserve was the height of dishonor and strategic illogic. Why would you not use your strongest tool to secure immediate victory? A victory tomorrow was meaningless if you appeared weak today. Their history was a litany of glorious, mutually destructive clashes where entire fleets were annihilated in the first engagement, the winner being the one who retained a single, shattered ship capable of emitting a victory pulse. This was not suicide, it was integrity. Thus, when the shadow of the Glondrothi swarm fell upon the hegemony's fringe worlds, the Kthari response was perfect, traditional, and utterly catastrophic. They identified the Glondrothi Nexus ship, a colossal biomechanical behemoth, and committed their entire first celestial armada in a direct, glorious thrust. The battle was a masterpiece of visible strength, particle lances carving continents into enemy hulls, suicide runs by drones glittering like deadly jewels, the armada's power output painting every sensor from here to Rigel. And they lost. Spectacularly. The Glondrothi did not fight with visible strength, they fought with adaptive, hidden biomass. They absorbed the initial fury, learned, and extruded specialized counterorganisms that dismantled the armada from within. The Kthari had shown their ultimate hand, and it had been trumped. It was in the ashes of this honorable defeat that they turned, with a mixture of shame and pragmatic hope, to the newcomers, Terra. The humans had strength, their ships were formidable. They had not intervened in the Glondrothi conflict, which the Kthari interpreted, not as neutrality, but as a judgment. The humans were observing, waiting to see if the Kthari were worthy. This was a logic the Kthari could understand. A stronger power waits for the weaker to prove itself. Ambassador Klar was dispatched to Sol. His mission, to demonstrate the Kthari's remaining strength and formally request an alliance, a subsumption into humanity's visible power block. He expected rituals of display. He expected to see humanity's martial might paraded before him. He expected a swift, decisive answer. He found, instead, Director Alastair Finch. Finch's office was atop the Geneva spire, a room of muted grays and soft, natural light. There were no weapons on display, no scrolling tactical feeds, no pulsing energy cores. There was a desk of recycled oak, a shelf of real paper books, and a small, archaic chess set with one pawn out of place. Finch himself was a man in his late 60s, with the calm, worn face of a retired geologist, not a starfaring strategist. Klar, his chitinous plates polished to a high gleam, his ocular nodes emitting a steady, respectful amber, initiated the ritual of open strength. He transmitted the full, unredacted sensor logs of the Battle of Theta Cygni, the glorious charge, the devastating defeat. He laid bare the hegemony's current military inventory, its depleted state. He offered territorial concessions, resource rights, all in real time, with no holding back. To withhold was weakness. His final, harmonized vocal tones resonated in the quiet room. "We have shown you our truth, Director Finch. Our strength is less than it was, but our resolve is a strength of its own. We ask you now, will you join your visible strength to ours? Will you act?" Finch had watched the brutal, beautiful disaster of Theta Cygni with an unreadable expression. He had sipped his Darjeeling tea. He had not, Clark noted with growing confusion, accessed any major tactical or intelligence networks. He had simply watched. "Ambassador Clark," Finch said, his voice a soft rumble. "That was a remarkable display. The courage of your pilots is beyond question." Clark's carapace flushed a pleased cobalt. The stronger being was acknowledging their strength. The alliance was imminent. "But," Finch continued, placing his cup precisely on its saucer, "we cannot commit at this time." The air seemed to leave the room. Clark's pigments dulled to a confused gray-green. "Cannot commit? Your sensors have seen our need. Your analysis must confirm the Glomdrothy threat expands. Your strength, combined with our remaining force, presents a logical probability of victory. To delay is to allow the threat to grow. This is illogical." "It is consideration," Finch corrected gently. "It is the gathering of understanding. You have our understanding." Clark's vocalizer spiked in frequency, a sign of deep distress. "We have given you everything. What further data could you require that is not contained in the demonstrated fact of our defeat?" Finch's eyes drifted to the chessboard. His fingers gently touched the lone advanced pawn. "The game isn't won or lost in the first exchange of pieces, Ambassador. It is won in the positioning you do not see, in the threats you hold in reserve, in the sacrifice you are willing to make not now, but 3 moves from now." Clark was silent. The concept was not just foreign, it was morally repugnant. A hidden threat was a lie. A delayed sacrifice was a cowardice. "You are saying," Clark translated slowly, the human language feeling clumsy and deceitful in his mouth, "that you possess strength you will not show us. That you see a path you will not illuminate. You are waiting for us to become weaker? So our submission will be more complete?" Finch sighed, a very human exhalation of frustration and empathy. "No. We are waiting to understand the enemy. We are waiting to understand you. We are preparing." "Preparation in the face of a burning house is the act of a fool or a ghost," Clark stated, quoting the 4th proverb of visible strength. He stood, his body rigid with disappointment. "You have great ships, Director Finch. You have the appearance of power. But you lack the will to make it real. You are a statue of a warrior, imposing to look upon, but incapable of action. You are static." He left Earth that day, his report to the Hegemony Council a masterpiece of despair. "The Terrans," he wrote, "possess the tools of strength but are psychologically incapable of its application. They are trapped in a state of perpetual preparation, their will paralyzed by analysis. They will not act until the enemy is at their own door, and, by then, it will be too late for all. We are alone." The Kthari, following their tradition, fought on. They fought gloriously, losing world after world, their strength becoming ever more visible in its brilliant, tragic expenditure. And, from their isolated, watching posts, humanity did nothing. They sent observer drones. They offered humanitarian aid, a concept the Kthari saw as pity, and, therefore, weakness. They continued to gather understanding. The Kthari's initial confusion curdled into a bitter, cosmic certainty: humanity was weak. A fascinating, aesthetically powerful, but ultimately hollow species. They had misread the signs. The human strength was an illusion. Part 2, The Human's Confusion, the Forge of Invisible Selves. What Clark and the Kthari perceived as paralysis was, in fact, a frenzy of activity, but it was activity directed inward, along a vector the aliens had no capacity to perceive. The principle was ancient, fractal, and woven into the human psyche. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. The Kthari sought to destroy external weakness through overwhelming, immediate display. Humanity's strategy was to first locate, isolate, and annihilate the weakness within. Director Alastair Finch was not a military commander. He was a meta-strategist, a psychologist of civilizations. His chessboard was not the galaxy, but the motivational and morphological frameworks of the two species at war. The Glomdrathi were a known quantity in principle, a hive-mind adaptive predator. Their weakness was their centralized consciousness, their need to assimilate to overcome. But the Kthari were the problem. Their culture of visible strength was a doomsday machine. To ally with them conventionally would be to be sucked into their tactical vortex, to commit to their glorious, losing battles. Humanity would be forced to show its hand, play by Glomdrathi rules, and likely lose alongside them. So Finch's first order, approved by a grim Terran coalition, was not to build a fleet, but to initiate Project Janus. Its mandate, to force the Terran military and scientific corps to destroy their own conceptual weaknesses. The weakness was doctrine. Human warfare, for all its advances, still relied on sequential escalation, scout, skirmish, fleet engagement, decisive battle. It was a slower, more cautious version of the Kthari's own tradition. Against the Glomdrathi, it would fail. A new doctrine had to be forged, and, to do that, the old one had to be shattered. Lieutenant Eris Thorne was assigned to Janus's wargaming division. For 18 months, she and thousands of others were subjected to a brutal, relentless simulation regimen. The simulations were not fair. They were designed to break. They would be given a standard Terran task force and pitted against a Glomdrathi simulation modeled on the Theta Cygni data. Every time they engaged in a decisive battle, they lost. Every time they tried to hold a line, they were outflanked by bioforms engineered to exploit its specific composition. Thorne's personal logs show the process. Month 3, another wipe. They're feeding our own tactical playbook into the sim and it's spitting back perfect counters. It's like fighting a mirror that learns and punches back before you've even decided to swing. Month 7, Admiral Chen snapped today. Told the SimOps to go to hell, that no enemy could be this omniscient. Finch himself came down. He didn't yell. He just said, the enemy is you. The weakness is the pattern. You have to kill the pattern. Kill the you that expects to win this way. What the hell does that mean? Month 11, we stopped trying to win. Sounds insane. We started running missions with the sole objective of dying in the most expensive way for the sim. Sending a single corvette on a suicide run to make the Glomdrathi overcommit anti-capital biomass to kill it. Using unshielded freighters as kinetic missiles to clog their nutrient intake vents. It's ugly, wasteful, inglorious. And, for the first time, the sim is hesitating. This was the destruction of the weak self. The weak self was the commander who sought a clean victory. The weak self was the engineer who designed only for symmetrical combat. The weak self was the human desire for a narrative of honorable confrontation. They burned it away in the crucible of the sim, forging a new, terrifying paradigm, asymmetric existential annoyance. The goal was not to defeat the Glomdrathi in battle. The goal was to make the process of assimilating humanity so computationally expensive, so energetically wasteful, so illogical to the hive mind that it would choose disengagement. While Thorne's division was learning to die usefully, another wing of Janus was performing a different kind of self-destruction. They were killing humanity's weakness for scale. The Glomdrathi grew their ships. Humanity, realizing it could never match biological speed of replication, went back to its oldest strength, manufacturing. But not in space docks. They designed the Chaffhopper, a ship barely more than a FTL drive, a guidance computer, and a bay filled with self-assembling, razor-sharp, chemically inert monofilament nets. A single Chaffhopper could seat a cubic AU of space with invisible, ship-slicing debris that was worthless as biomass, could not be adapted to, and cost a fraction of a missile to produce. It was not a weapon. It was litter. On a galactic scale. Other projects were even more bizarre. Project Maelstrom developed viral algorithms to be injected into Glomdrathi biocircuits, not to destroy, but to induce infinite, recursive loops of self-diagnosis, paralyzing chunks of the hive with existential cybernetic angst. Project Gorgon devised radiation pulses that scrambled morphogenetic fields, causing Glomdrothy ship growth to produce useless, cancerous blobs of tissue. None of these were ultimate weapons in the Cthari sense. They were tricks, annoyances, psychological and physiological warfare aimed at the enemy's mind and metabolic processes. They were the antithesis of visible strength. They were invisible vexations. And, all the while, Finch watched the Cthari burn. His log entries are clinical, yet haunted. Cthari World Gamma September fell today. Their defense fleet executed a perfect final charge. 98% losses, inflicted 40% damage on the Glomdrothy vanguard. The hegemony broadcasts it as a song of heroic sacrifice. Our models show it accelerated the swarm's adaptation rate by 7%. Their strength feeds the enemy. Our silence confounds them. Clar was right. To them, we are ghosts. But, a ghost cannot be bitten. A ghost can haunt. Humanity's confusion, from the Cthari perspective, was a profound mistake. From the human perspective, the Cthari confusion was the mistake. They believed strength was something you had and showed. Humanity had learned, through millennia of pain, that strength was something you became by destroying what you used to be. The Cthari were looking for an ally with a bigger sword. Humanity was in the backroom, forging a key that would fit the lock inside the enemy's head. Part 3, Why Haven't You Acted? The emergence of the Sheercliff Principle, the Cthari homeworld, Cthar Prime, was the last jewel. The hegemony had gathered the pitiful remnants of its fleets, every ship that could hold air and fire a bolt. It would be the final charge. A light of such visible strength that it would be seen across the galactic arm for eons. A good death. Ambassador Clar, now a fleet conscript in the line of ending, sent one last, raw, unmodulated burst transmission towards Sol. It contained no data, no requests. Only a single, harmonic phrase, thick with the static of despair: why haven't you acted? It was not a question. It was an epitaph for two species, one dying by the sword, the other by its inexplicable, cowardly refusal to draw one. On the bridge of the Cthari flagship, unwavering proof, Clar watched the Glomdrothy swarm blot out the stars. He felt a strange, serene clarity. They would die with truth on their side. The humans would die later, liars and ghosts to the last. Then, space rippled. Not with the majestic, energy-blazing emergence of a grand armada, but with a million tiny, ignoble pops. Like static. 20,000 chaffhoppers, positioned over 2 years by stealth drones, disgorged their payloads in a sphere around Cthar Prime. Trillions upon trillions of monofilament nets unfolded, creating a shifting, invisible labyrinth of razor wire on a planetary scale. The leading edge of the Glomdrothy swarm, 100 bio-dreadnoughts and their fighter scourge, plunged into it. There was no explosion. There was a grotesque, silent shearing. Dreadnoughts were sliced into geometric segments, spilling their viscous internals. Scourge fighters disintegrated into confetti. It was not a battle, it was a mechanical digestion. The swarm halted. It adapted. It began emitting dense plasma fields to burn the nets. It was a logical, effective counter. It also required a massive energy reallocation, slowing their advance to a crawl. From the shadow of Cthar's moon, 500 human vessels appeared. They were not the majestic battleships the Cthari expected. They were blocky, utilitarian, scarred from relentless simulation. The TCS Resolute, Lieutenant Eris Thorn on its tactical deck, was among them. All vessels, Fleet Admiral Chen's voice came, cool and devoid of heroic timbre. Execute Plan Phlegathon. Priority targets, neural nexus conduits. Flood the zones with maelstrom. Don't fight their strength. Bypass it. Annoy it to death. What followed was not a space battle as the Cthari understood it. There were no grand lines, no climactic broadsides. Human ships moved in erratic, seemingly suicidal patterns, launching not volleys of missiles, but clouds of micro-projectiles and data spikes. Where they hit, Glomdrothy vessels didn't explode, they seized. They spasmed. One dreadnought began endlessly extruding and reabsorbing its own weapon tendrils in a paralytic loop. Another simply stopped, its surface bubbling with chaotic, nonsensical growths. A Glomdrothy counterstrike, a concentrated lance of bioplasma, speared towards the Resolute. Standard doctrine said, raise shields, evade. Thorn, her weak self long since destroyed in the Sims, instead ordered, cut port thrusters, hard starboard roll. Present our dorsal armor, specifically section 7B. 7B is still compromised from the Sims, the helmsman yelled. Exactly, Thorn said, her voice flat. It's rated for 30% dissipation. It'll fail catasthetically, directing the plasma bleed away from engineering and into that cluster of swarm processors. We lose the section, they get a faceful of their own cooked biomass. The plasma hit. Alarms screamed. The ship shuddered. A section of the hull vaporized in a channel jet that speared backwards, slagging a cluster of delicate Glomdrothy sensor orbs. The Resolute was wounded. The enemy was confused and blinded in a local sector. It was a terrible trade by Kthari math. By the new human math, it was optimal. Klar watched, his cognitive frames breaking. This was not warfare. It was a systemic insult. It was fighting a forest fire by tickling it. And it was working. The colossal, adaptive, all-consuming swarm was stuttering. It was being forced to devote vast resources to countering 1,000 tiny, irrational, economically priced threats. Its beautiful, efficient biological logic was being drowned in a sea of cheap, human-made illogic. The climax was not a blast. It was a whisper. A single, modified human long-range probe, disguised as debris, slipped through the chaotic field and physically embedded itself into the main neural nexus of the Glomdrothy command organism. It delivered one payload, the Gorgon pulse, amplified by 1,000-fold. The effect was invisible for a moment. Then, the great Nexus ship, the heart of the swarm, ceased all coherent activity. Its surface rippled, then erupted in a frenzy of uncontrolled, purposeless morphogenesis. It grew spires, then mouths, then eye stalks, then fur, then crystalline structures, a speed evolution of biological forms with no direction, no function, just an insane, cancerous creativity. The hive mind, faced with this total negation of its own logical principles of adaptation, experienced a cascade failure. The connection snapped. The swarm dissolved from a coordinated army into a billion confused, autonomous organisms, many of them busy growing useless appendages or trying to digest themselves. The silence that fell over Kthar Prime was deafening. The human fleet, battered, full of holes, smoking from non-standard wounds, hung in the void. They had not won a decisive battle. They had administered a cognitive pesticide. Klar was brought aboard the TCS Resolute. He stood on the scorched, busy deck, facing Lieutenant Thorn, who was having a nasty plasma burn sealed by a medic. He looked at the pragmatic, unglorious chaos of the human ship. He looked at Thorn's tired, victorious, utterly non-triumphant face. You? Clar's vocalizer struggled. You let us burn. You let worlds die. You waited until we were at our end. Thorn winced as the medic worked. We weren't waiting for you to get weak, Ambassador. We were waiting for us to get ready. We had to change what we were. We had to become something the swarm couldn't digest. You became monsters, Klar whispered, though the harmonic held awe, not disgust. You fought without form, without honor, with a calculated meanness. No, Thorn said, meeting his ocular nodes. We destroyed the part of us that needed the form, that craved that kind of honor. The part that would have charged in with you and died beautifully. That was the weak self. The Glomdrothy could have destroyed that species. They had no way to destroy this. She gestured at the patched hull, the weird weapon bays, the exhausted crew who had just fought a war by being more annoying than the enemy could tolerate. Later, in the first joint debriefing, a Kthari philosopher soldier, named Shearcliff in the human record, uttered the summation that would become the axiom: we believed strength was a flame to be held high, so all could see and fear its light. You humans understand that true strength is the will to break your own lantern, shatter the glass, and use the broken shards, in the darkness, to gut the enemy who was only ever prepared to fight a flame. The Shearcliff principle is now foundational to xenopsychological studies. A species capable of the metacognitive act of identifying and deliberately destroying its own foundational strategic paradigms presents an existential defense profile that is inherently nonlinear and highly resistant to conventional prediction or adaptation. Their strength does not reside in what they are, but in what they are willing to cease being. Humanity did not save the Kthari by being stronger. They saved them by being willing to become, strategically, something utterly alien and unrecognizable, even to themselves. The Kthari asked, "Why haven't you acted?" Because they were waiting for an action they could recognize. Humanity's action was the months spent in simulators, killing their own instincts. The battle was merely the funeral pyre for their weak selves, and the enemy was unlucky enough to be standing in the flames. Addendum: Kthari philosophical discourse is currently undergoing what they term the Great Inversion. Studies of human history, from guerrilla wars to information age hacking, are now their most vital theological texts. The question, "What would a human not do to win?" has replaced, "How can we show our greatest strength?" as their core strategic dilemma. Meanwhile, in a bar on Mars, Lieutenant Eris Thorne, Rhett, still has nightmares about The Sims. She drinks with Clar, now a cultural attaché, who still sometimes harmonizes, softly and wonderingly, "You broke your own lantern." She clinks her glass against his chitinous limb and says, "Yeah. It was in the way." This response is AI generated, for reference only.